Auge 1 an Festung. Feindmeldung. Feindliche Landungsboote und Anlandung von Feindkräften. Stärke unklar vor Pas-de-Calais.
In the early years of the Second World War, Adolf Hitler was not focused on defending against a cross-channel attack, in part because Allied action had done little to instill fear of a large-scale invasion. The raid at Dieppe in August 1942 was an utter failure that resulted in the death of thousands of Canadian soldiers. Although the defeat of the Soviet Union remained the primary concern for German High Command, it continued to build defensive positions in the West as an economy of force. For years, Hitler believed the construction of an Atlantic wall would protect against Allied landings. But by late 1943, Hitler's confidence in Fortress Europe was crumbling. Successful Allied campaigns in the Mediterranean had demonstrated amphibious and airborne prowess, while Soviet forces were turning the tide in the east. Closer to home, the once dominant Luftwaffe was sputtering against Allied air efforts. Concerned over the possibility of a spring invasion, Hitler issued Führer Directive No. 51 in November 1943. This directive added immediacy to an earlier directive by once again making the Atlantic Wall a top priority. Soon, German divisions in the West were increased. New military leadership, including Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, arrived, and defensive positions were constructed or reinforced. For the Allies, operations in the Mediterranean had set the stage for a cross-channel invasion that would open a second and more direct route to Nazi Germany. While President Franklin D. Roosevelt and Prime Minister Winston Churchill were meeting in Washington at the Trident Conference in 1943 to discuss grand strategy, the Chief of Staff to the Supreme Allied Commander, known as Cossack, was planning three very different operations. The first was a cross-channel attack originating from the United Kingdom. The second, an operation in the event Germany unexpectedly collapsed under Allied pressure. And the third, a deception plan that would threaten an imminent Allied invasion. Of these three, Cossack's diversion plan for 1943, known as Operation Cockade, centered on holding German forces in the West to prevent reinforcement in the Mediterranean and Eastern theaters. Operations Starkey, Tyndall, and Wadham all fell under Cockade. These operations were also supposed to create opportunities to destroy the Luftwaffe, but they proved relatively unsuccessful. Operation Starkey was particularly daring because it was intended to convince German leaders that the Allies would land in northern France at Pas-de-Calais, one of the two possible locations planners were actually considering. Pas-de-Calais was a logical choice, as it offered the closest geographic point between England and the continent. Consequently, this was the same location German planners had considered early in the war when contemplating an invasion of England. From the Allied perspective, Pas-de-Calais was an attractive option as it had level beaches and was the most direct route to Berlin. Unfortunately, the location was well defended and allowed for German counterattacks to arrive from three directions. The Normandy beaches near Caen, on the other hand, were steeper and further from Allied bases in the UK. The closest major ports were Cherbourg and Le Havre, which made Normandy seem less viable in the eyes of the Germans. Both possible landing sites did fall within reach of Allied fighters, a factor that planners deemed essential. In June 1943, Lieutenant General Frederick Morgan, the head of Cossack, ordered his British planners to prepare for Pas-de-Calais, while his American officers began working on a Normandy invasion. Weeks later, the British team concluded,
"Not only does the strength of the defences demand a weight of assault which the restricted capacity of the beaches cannot admit, but the restrictions imposed by the beaches do not allow a rapid build-up. Further, even if the assault were practicable, the geography of the area does not permit the capture of sufficient ports to maintain the force, and the terrain does not allow the defence and exploitation of the bridgehead by the occupation of successive natural obstacles."
With the elimination of Pas-de-Calais, as well as other sites such as Le Havre and the Cotentin Peninsula, Cossack and later the Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight D. Eisenhower targeted the Normandy beaches for a cross-channel attack. Deception operations would prove critical on D-Day.
There are 3 types of deception operations: military deception, tactical deception, and deception in support of operation security. Military deception, or MILDEC, is actions executed to deliberately mislead adversary military, paramilitary, or violent extremist organization decision-makers, thereby causing the adversary to take specific actions or inactions that will contribute to the accomplishment of the friendly mission. Deception applies to all levels of warfare across the range of military operations and is conducted during all phases of military operations. When properly integrated with Operation Security, or OPSEC, deception can be a decisive tool in altering how the enemy views, analyzes, decides, and acts in response to friendly military operations. Planners must have a thorough understanding of the functions and the scope of what deception can and cannot accomplish. The functions of deception include, but are not limited to, causing delay and surprise through ambiguity, confusion, or misunderstanding, causing the enemy to misallocate personnel, fiscal, and material resources, causing the enemy to reveal strengths, weaknesses, dispositions, and intentions, and causing the enemy to waste combat power and resources with inappropriate or delayed actions. The second type of deception, tactical deception, or TAC-D, is an activity planned and executed by and in support of tactical-level commanders to cause enemy decision-makers to take actions or inactions prejudicial to themselves and favorable to the achievement of tactical commanders' objectives.
Although Operation Cockade did not meet all of its goals, the Allies had previously experienced some success with deception operations in the Middle East and Mediterranean. This was especially true for the British. During a conversation with Joseph Stalin regarding the importance of deception, Winston Churchill remarked,
"In wartime, truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies."
Operation Bodyguard would grow out of an earlier deception plan called Jail that was designed to obscure Allied intentions and timelines. Like Cockade, Bodyguard was a strategic umbrella of deception operations. Of these, Operation Fortitude was the most ambitious. Broken down into multiple areas of operations and phases, Fortitude attempted to confuse German decision-makers as to the size, location, and time of the Allied cross-channel attack set for early June 1944.
Any deception aims to either increase or decrease the level of uncertainty or ambiguity in the mind of the deception target. This ambiguity has the potential to compel the target to mistakenly perceive friendly motives, intentions, capabilities, and vulnerabilities, thereby altering the target's assessment. Two generally recognized types of MILDEC exist: ambiguity increasing and ambiguity decreasing. Ambiguity increasing deception provides the enemy with multiple plausible friendly courses of action, or COAs. Ambiguity increasing deception is designed to generate confusion and cause mental conflict in the enemy decision-maker. Anticipated effects of ambiguity increasing deception can include a delay to making a specific decision, operational paralysis, or the distribution of enemy forces to locations far away from the intended location of the friendly efforts. Ambiguity increasing deception is often directed against decision-makers known to be indecisive or risk-adverse. These deceptions draw attention from one set of activities to another. They can create the illusion of strength where weakness exists, or create the illusion of weakness where strength exists. They can also acclimate the enemy to particular patterns of activity that are exploitable later. For example, ambiguity increasing deceptions can cause the target to delay a decision until it is too late to prevent friendly mission success. They can place the target in a dilemma for which no acceptable solution exists. They may even prevent the target from taking any action at all. Ambiguity-decreasing deceptions manipulate and exploit an enemy decision-maker's pre-existing beliefs and bias through the intentional display of observables that reinforce and convince the decision-maker that their pre-held beliefs are true. Ambiguity-decreasing deceptions cause the enemy decision-maker to be especially certain and very wrong. Ambiguity-decreasing deceptions aim to direct the enemy to be at the wrong place, at the wrong time, with the wrong equipment, and with fewer capabilities. Ambiguity-decreasing deceptions are more challenging to plan because they require comprehensive information on the enemy's processes and intelligence systems. Planners often have success using these deceptions with strong-minded decision-makers who are willing to accept a higher level of risk.
During Phase 1 of Operation Fortitude, Allied planners went to great lengths to make German commanders believe that the bulk of the invasion force would only enter combat after a series of diversionary movements. Fortitude North created the perception of a pending operation against Scandinavia. As part of this deception, an invasion force from the United Kingdom would initiate a series of attacks, starting at Stavanger in southern Norway. While a buildup of infantry and fighters commenced around Stavanger, the Allies would make an amphibious landing against Narvik in the north. These divisions would then maneuver inland across the border into Sweden, where they would link up with a Soviet force advancing from Finland. Under this deception plan, a cross-channel attack would not be initiated until the Scandinavian operation transpired, possibly in mid-July 1944. Meanwhile, Fortitude South was designed to convince the German decision-makers that the primary invasion was headed for Pas-de-Calais. The landing force would create a bridgehead before driving toward the major cities and transportation hubs in Belgium. Fortitude's second phase would begin after the real landings at the Normandy beaches were underway. Few things concerned Allied planners more than a failed foothold. Understanding their enemy's doctrine, Cossack expected.
The normal German system is to concentrate reserves well forward behind threatened sectors in order to get the maximum forces into action on D-Day. The crux of the operation will be our ability to land forces quickly enough, first, to hold the initial German counterattacks, and then to defeat and drive off the large German reserves which will be brought in against our bridgehead.
To address the threat of massed combat power, Phase 2 of Operation Fortitude would attempt to hold defenders in place by convincing the German High Command that Normandy was just a feint, and that the primary landings at Pas-de-Calais would only be initiated after significant German forces had maneuvered toward Caen. Like the Allies, Germany maintained several intelligence services. In the West, a section under the Army High Command, Foreign Armies West, was responsible for creating daily situation reports used by the operational staffs. Open animosity existed between this group and the German intelligence service, or Abwehr, which was viewed by its fellow Wehrmacht officers as unreliable and disloyal to the Third Reich. Unlike the German services, the Allied human and signals intelligence groups played a pivotal role in the overall war effort. German military forces communicated through a variety of encrypted methodologies, including the Enigma machine, which its army had been using since the interwar period. Believed by many to be unbreakable, Enigma became the primary crypto device used by the German military for army-level units and below. Building off the extensive work shared by the Polish Cipher Bureau in 1939, the British Government Code and Cipher School at Bletchley managed to decode the German Enigma machine. While Berlin believed its communiques secure, the Allies' ability to read Enigma transmissions provided essential feedback on the overall state of the deception. British intelligence further supported the deception effort through the double-cross system, which turned German agents operating in the UK and Western Europe. These men and women were influential in shaping the German perception of what was happening inside the UK. Armed with coded messages and a few wireless transmitters, The double-cross agents sent Allied authorized messages to German handlers across the English Channel. Although many agents assisted throughout the course of the war, British intelligence relied on Brutus, Tricycle, Freak, Tate, Treasure, Garbo, and others to deliver intelligence tied to the Fortitude mission. The operative known as Garbo went so far as to fabricate an elaborate organization of informants who reported to him. This structure, which existed only on paper, allowed Garbo to report on activities from all over the United Kingdom and even North America. The counter-espionage effort of Double Cross protected against the collection of information by German intelligence entities while simultaneously offering the Allies a conduit to deception targets.
Deception in support of Operation Security, or DISO, is a deception activity that conveys or denies selected information or signatures to a foreign intelligence entity, or FIE, and limits the enemy's overall ability to collect or accurately analyze critical information about friendly operations, personnel, programs, equipment, and other assets. The intent of DISO is to create multiple false, confusing, or misleading indicators to make friendly force intentions harder to interpret by FIE. DISO makes it difficult for FIEs to identify or accurately derive the critical information and indicators protected by OPSEC. Deception and OPSEC are mutually supporting activities. DISO prevents potential enemies from accurately profiling friendly activities that would provide an indication of a specific course of action or operational activity. DISO differs from joint MILDEC and TAC-D plans in that it only targets FIEs and is not focused on generating a specific enemy action or inaction. Failure to maintain good OPSEC can enable the enemy to identify the operation as a deception effort, with resulting second and third order effects, such as the refocusing of enemy intelligence collection and combat power against actual friendly force dispositions and intent.
Despite the lore surrounding Blitzkrieg, the German army as a whole actually suffered from a lack of mobility. This was particularly true for the infantry units stationed in France. With the majority of transportation assets allocated to the Eastern Front, static units were stationed near the shore. Once an Allied invasion started, German commanders planned to march or truck local units and transport distant units to the front via train to counter the offensive. The Germans' ability to mass combat power with armored and mechanized divisions against a lodgment was one of the Allies' greatest concerns. These units, located beyond the beachhead, posed a serious threat. This explains why so much of the deception planning was designed to fix mechanized units in place. Planners worked to minimize the German counterattacks to 3 divisions on D-Day, 5 by D+2, and 9 by D+8. To help meet this goal, the Allies turned to their air forces and the French resistance to weaken transportation networks. Although politically splintered into groups that suffered limited communication, the French underground is estimated to have reached 200,000 partisans. During the course of the war, these forces worked with Allied special operations to provide on-the-ground intelligence and wage partisan warfare. From June 1943 through May 1944, the resistance and Allied bombing damaged an estimated 1,800 locomotives and 8,000 freight cars, while destroying thousands more. To sow additional confusion, bombers reinforced the deception plan by striking throughout the continent to keep up the appearance of multiple landing sites. Planners contended that a strong deception operation, in conjunction with attacks against German lines of communication and logistical hubs, could seal off the Normandy beaches from a strong German counterattack. Above all, military deception hinges on the ability to influence enemy decision-makers. In the German chain of command, this power ultimately rested with the Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, Adolf Hitler. Below him, a growing rift existed between OB West Commander Gerd von Rundstedt and Field Marshal Rommel. Rundstedt wanted panzer reserves capable of quickly counterattacking against any Allied beachhead. Rommel, his subordinate, wanted armor in forward positions closer to the water's edge, where attackers are most vulnerable. Rommel was also concerned that Allied air power would blunt a German counterattack if his troops were forced to travel great distances. Hitler eventually compromised between the two positions, angering both commanders. Although splintered over the specifics of the defensive plan, Hitler and the rest of the German High Command were very aware of the most likely Allied courses of action. At the beginning of the year, Rundstedt warned,
"The year 1944 will bring the invasion in the West and with it the decision of the war. The invasion is most likely to come in June. The most likely possibilities are along the English Channel, astride the Seine estuary, along the east coast of Normandy. Deception maneuvers are always possible and likely."
Seeking to overcome the significant challenge of masking an enormous invasion force that could not be hidden from the enemy, the Allies would use all deception means at their disposal in the preparation for Overlord.
Deception means are methods, resources, and techniques that can be used to convey information to the deception target. There are three basic categories of deception means: administrative, physical, and technical. Planners normally employ deception means in a complementary variety to mislead multiple types of enemy sensors in order to increase the credibility and the likelihood of creating the desired perception. Administrative means portray information and indicators associated with coordination for ongoing or planned military activity to the deception target. Examples of administrative means include movement, transit, or overflight requests, including flight planning, port call, or traffic control coordination, basing inquiries or construction requests, or other preparatory coordination associated with a military operation normally done through unclassified channels.
Allied planners estimated that the Abwehr monitored Lieutenant General George Patton, whose exploits often made front-page news. With this in mind, the Allies placed Patton and a staff in charge of an illusionary 1st United States Army Group, supposedly comprised of the U.S. Third Army and Canadian First Army. This information, which appeared quite credible, was then fed to the enemy through administrative means. Had it actually existed, the 1st United States Army Group, or FUSAG, would have consisted of a massive force of roughly 150,000 soldiers. Confusing the Germans as to the sheer size of the invasion force was an essential deception component of Fortitude Phase 2. It was designed to make defenders believe 2 invasion waves would land at 2 separate littoral sites. This was only possible if German decision-makers believed the Allies possessed enough troops to accomplish this feat. The success of this charade was confirmed several months before D-Day by Allied codebreakers, who started to see FUSAG in encrypted German communications. Choosing General Patton to head the fake army fits into Magruder's principle, which states, it is generally easier to induce the deception target to maintain a pre-existing belief than to deceive the deception target for the purpose of changing that belief. Selecting Patton to spearhead the invasion force made sense to German decision-makers in light of his talent and recent victories in the Mediterranean.
The second type of deception means are physical means, which are resources, methods, and techniques used to convey or deny information or signatures normally derivable from direct observation or active sensors by the deception target. Most physical means also have technical signatures visible to sensors that collect scientifically or electronically. Examples might include movement of forces, exercises and training activities, decoy equipment and devices, tactical actions, visible test and evaluation activities, and reconnaissance and surveillance activities.
Maximizing the use of camouflage, concealment, and decoys, the Allies invested heavily in physical means in the months and days before the cross-channel invasion. Dummy soldiers, dummy vehicles, and dummy bases were established throughout the United Kingdom to provide credence to the fabricated units. Fake military camps were even set up for the Luftwaffe to spot, including a presence in southeast England, which would have made sense to the Germans since it was the closest crossing point to Pas-de-Calais. Double agents were also used to reinforce the existence of fake units. This created a Jones dilemma, which occurs when a target receives information through multiple means and methods, from many angles, throughout an operational environment. Deception generally becomes more difficult as the number of conduits available to the target increase, but the greater the number of conduits that are deceptively manipulated, the greater the chance the target will believe the deception. Acts of deception were also planned for after the commencement of the actual Normandy invasion. As part of Operations Glimmer and Taxable, air forces dropped large floating cylinders offshore from suspected landing sites, thus creating a virtual military force. This moving ghost fleet added yet another layer of confusion to radar stations and patrols, which reported the signatures up their chains of command. The deception bogged down an already overburdened communications system at a critical point in the battle.
The last type of deception means are technical means, which are resources, methods, and techniques used to convey or deny selected information or signatures to or from the deception target. These means manipulate electromagnetic, acoustic, or other forms of energy, or through olfaction. Technical means may be applied with a corresponding physical means, or alone to replicate something physical that is absent from direct visual observation. Examples of technical means might include the establishment of communications networks and interactive transmissions that replicate a specific unit type, size, or activity, the emission or suppression of chemical or biological odors associated with a specific capability or activity, multispectral simulators that replicate or mimic the known electronic profile of a specific capability or force, or selected capabilities that disrupt an enemy sensor or affect data transmission.
Allied planners initiated several technologically based deceptions before invading. For instance, in early 1944, dummy armies began transmitting fake radio traffic to add credibility to the deception that these units actually existed. In the build-up to the invasion, lighting systems were constructed along the coast in southeast England to convey the appearance that soldiers were working around the clock in preparation for an attack on Calais. And on D-Day-1, the Allies deployed airborne and seaborne radar jamming technology, known as Mandrel, as a way to mask the invasion fleet from detection. There were multiple factors that contributed to the Allied victory on D-Day, and the impact of deception operations played a vital role. In the months before Overlord, the Germans' inaccurate assessment of Allied divisions plagued decision-makers who were forced to deal with the possibility of multiple invasion sites. In January 1944, the Allies possessed 37 divisions in the United Kingdom, but deception efforts had convinced the Germans they had 55. By June, just prior to the invasion, the defenders believed the number to be between 75 and 90 divisions. This erroneous evaluation negated OB West's ability to reinforce rapidly against any beachhead established by the Allies. In terms of the success of Fortitude North, Hitler rotated units in and out of Scandinavia, but ultimately left more than 10 divisions sitting in Norway and Denmark even after D-Day. As for the impact of Phase 1 of Fortitude South, the Fuhrer was uncertain if the landing would be at Pas-de-Calais or Normandy. But his month-long reluctance to redeploy forces from Calais after D-Day demonstrates that Hitler, as the deception target, bought into the Fortitude Phase 2 goal that a second major invasion remained imminent. Such evident success marked Operation Overlord as an outstanding example of the importance of deception operations in large-scale combat operations. The Supreme Allied Commander agreed.
During World War II, both cover and deception and psychological warfare, in its various forms, contributed materially and at times paid high dividends for the effort which we put into them. Particularly in the case of the former, experience indicated that due to the extent to which strategic and tactical cover plans assisted in the attainment of real objectives, no major operation should be undertaken without planning and executing appropriate deceptive measures.
General Dwight D. Eisenhower and his deputy commanders chart the liberation of a lost continent, plan when and where the mighty armies of the United Nations will strike. Today, northern France is that battleground.